righty. Hey, folks, it is Jordan from Mind and Soil here. Hope everybody is doing well. If you could just let me know that you're able to hear me, that would be great. Perfect. Hey, folks, it is Jordan from Mind and Soil here, just getting all set up and settled in. If you could let me know in the chat function here, if you're able to hear me, that would be absolutely great. And then what I'm going to be doing is I'm also going to be sharing my screen here. So let me go ahead and pop that into screen share. I guess I got to turn on the actual screen share button as well. Perfect. And I'm just going to pop this into present mode. So if you're able to let me know that you can see my screen here as well, that would be great. Hey, Dennis. All right, perfect. Hey, Tabia. Wonderful. And hey, Wilma. Great. So sounds like you're able to hear me okay, and believe that everybody is able to see my screen here as well. So what we're going to do is just hop straight onto our kind of happy hour housekeeping screen here. And so for some of you that may have attended before, you know what this is all about. But for those of you that are on your first happy hour here today, you do know that this is the happy hour shirt. It might be 11 a.m. where I am, but that doesn't mean that we're going to have a whole lot of fun here today on this Saturday. So as we go through our session here today, I would love for any questions that you have related to anything gardening specific, and of course today is focused on garlic, to type those into the chat function. I've got that pulled up right beside me here, and so that's where I'm going to be able to interact with you and answer any of those questions that come through. And so just to make sure that everybody knows where that chat function is located, I would love for you to let us know in the chat function where you're dialing in from today. Where's everybody joining us from? Do we have folks all across Canada? Is it just BC? Anybody outside of Canada? Let me know in the chat function there. Second piece is that once you've typed that in, go ahead and grab yourself a little drink, a snack. For those of you that are in the afternoons, maybe that's a beer or a wine. For those of us that are still in the morning, maybe it's a coffee, a tea, a morning mimosa, you choose. But again, I don't want this feeling like a work meeting, anything like that. I want us to have a whole lot of fun here over the course of the next 30 to 40 minutes. And the last piece is that I encourage you to sit somewhere else to where you work over the course of the week. Really, really want to be switching out of being in kind of working mode and working brain and into just rest and restoration and relaxation. So if I was viewing this and not presenting, I'd be sitting upstairs next to my fireplace up there. All right, so we got Wilma from Calgary, T-Rich from North Carolina, Dennis over in North Wales. So you're into the evening there, which definitely means that some form of a drink should be in hand. And Tabia from Virginia. Amazing. So yeah, I think we've got a smaller group here today, so we should be able to get to all the questions that come through over the course of the session. And looks like the chat function is working for everybody here. So want to go ahead and start kind of rolling into this here. And so for those of you that I have not met before, my name is Jordan. I'm the founder here at Mind and Soil, where we're focused on introducing 1 million individuals to gardening's mental health benefits. So if you're kind of a more experienced gardener, I'm guessing that a big part of why you come back to the garden, why you love the garden so much, is because of how peaceful, how calming, how restorative it can be. And for anybody that might be on the newer side to gardening, I know that when you're trying something new, it can feel a little bit daunting, a little bit overwhelming, almost a little bit stressful, which is like the opposite of how we want gardening to feel. And so a huge part of our responsibility at Mind and Soil is to be doing events like this where we can help you feel more comfortable, more confident, getting your hands dirty, so that ultimately you're tapping into and experiencing just how peaceful and calming gardening is. And so if you have any questions over the course of the season after our session today, feel free at any point to send those through to us on Instagram at Mind and Soil. We respond to every single one of them, or you can always leave a comment on any of the videos on YouTube. We upload every single week, and we answer all of those as well. And so for today, we are of course focused on garlic. And so this past season, I had my absolute best harvest ever. You can take a look here and just see the size of the heads of garlic that were coming out of my beds relative to things that I was seeing at the store. And I attribute this to a number of kind of key changes that I made from previous seasons. So applying the learnings from growing garlic for multiple seasons that ultimately resulted in a much better crop. And so what I want to do is I want to walk us through the season from right around now when we're in the planting phase and some of those key changes that I made and things that we want to be doing. And then into the growth phase when we're into the new year. So we can absolutely be maximizing those longer and warmer days and helping our babies put on as much growth as possible. And then we're going to wrap up by talking about how do we harvest our babies and when is the right time to do so. So I'm gonna have a quick little sip of water here, and then we're gonna get started with the very first step of growing big and beautiful heads of garlic. All right, so for getting started here, the very first thing that we need to be doing is that we want to determine which variety of garlic we want to be growing. And this is going to vary for each of us, right? We've got Dennis over in North Wales and Tabia in Virginia and T-Rich down in North Carolina. So for T-Rich, that could be more of a soft neck variety because you are in a warmer climate. But for those of us that are in cooler climates, we want to go with a hardneck variety. So these are the two primary families of garlic, hardneck and softneck. And those that are in warmer climates, such as zone 8, 9, 10, and above, you'd be going with a warm and a softneck variety, such as a California Early or a Silver Rose. And then for those of us that are in a cooler and colder climate, we would want to be going with a hardneck variety. So my absolute favorite are Red Russians. That's what you're seeing in that picture. But you could also go with something like an Italian or a Majestic. And for myself, everything in my garden that I plant here in Squamish, British Columbia, Canada, is of the Red Russian variety. They give really nice, good-sized heads of garlic and really good, tasty cloves. So that's what I go with. So very first thing that we need to be figuring out before we put anything into the ground is just making sure that we're putting the right variety of garlic into the ground. Once we've determined what that is, whether it's a soft neck or hard neck, the second step of making sure that we're doing everything correctly to grow big and beautiful heads of garlic is determining the location for where we plant in our garden. So 2 years ago when I had just bought this house, take a look at my garden there, and where do you think that I planted my garlic and I didn't have a very good harvest? Well, it was right in this shade section here. So I had moved up here in kind of the late summer. I was so busy inside painting the walls, moving in, getting furniture set up, that I didn't really even get any time to spend in the garden. I got to right around now in October, I threw my cloves in the ground, only to then realize in the spring that just based on how the sun kind of rises and comes across the land and where my house is positioned, that this one corner gets next to no sun. So for growing big and beautiful heads of garlic, we want them to be in a high sun location. And so what I did the following year, this past season, 2021, was I just moved it over about 5 feet. But by moving it over 5 feet, and again, when we think about the location of my house, how the sun moves and where my house is, that ends up being one of my sunniest beds. And that was one of the changes that I made to really kind of improve the heads and the size of the garlic that I was getting out of my garden beds there. So my big encouragement to you on this front is that you find a location in your garden, like don't just rush into putting them into the ground, but find a location where they're getting really nice and good sun there. Okay, so that is the second piece. We now have our garlic heads on hand, whether that's a soft neck or a hard neck, and we've determined the location in our bed. The third thing that we need to be doing is we need to be getting that soil ready. And so what type of soil does garlic like would be the question we'd want to be thinking through there. And they really like something that is loose and fluffy and well draining. And the way that we go about creating that is by adding compost. So before you plant your garlic, I encourage you to add 1 to 2 inches of compost into that bed or that planting space. And so what you can see here is that I grabbed my wheelbarrow, a whole bunch of compost that I had made, dumped it all in, And then I grabbed my shovel and I'm just kind of evening that out all around the garden bed here until I get to that kind of, again, 1 to 2 inches of fresh new compost in there. The reason why we want to be utilizing compost is because, first and foremost, it's absolutely packed with nutrients. Our garlic babies are going to be pretty big feeders, so we really want to make sure that they have all of the nutrients that they need to be growing and then developing those big and beautiful heads. Now, garlic, it also really likes to be in a looser soil, and so by adding compost, which is organic matter, we are ensuring that kind of area that we're growing it in is really, really nice and loose. Water can run through it, and those roots can go and find that water. And I'm going to show you a video in a little while where you can see just how big that root system is. And then, of course, it's something that is incredibly sustainable. Now, one quick kind of like pause and moment to chat just a little bit further about compost is that this is something that we should be doing on an ongoing basis. So I add compost to my beds every fall and then every spring. I add it in the fall to kind of begin the rejuvenation process, because whether it was tomatoes or beets or carrots or squashes or cabbages, the plant babies have been pulling nutrients from that soil, and I want to begin recharging that bed all through the winter. And then when we get into the springtime, that's when we want to be adding a fresh round of compost in there so that any plants that we're moving into the beds, they're also getting a bunch of nutrients. So if you have any questions on compost, please do send those through into the chat function. It's definitely something that I'm more than happy to shed more light on. So now that we've got the compost in the beds there, what we need to be thinking through is the actual planting in and around it. And so for planting our garlic babies, and just to kind of quickly pause here, if we make it through step 4 and we do these things, then we are very, very well on our way to be growing beautiful babies. Step 4 is the last step of kind of the fall planting phase. I'm going to walk through a video on each one of these. So if any of this is feeling like a little bit too much information, don't worry, don't stress. We've got a video for each and every one of these. And then there's also the recording of this whole happy hour is going to be available to you, so you can relate back to it at any point that you need. But for planting our babies, we want to do them 6 inches off center. I'm going to show you a video of that, exactly how to go about doing it. Second piece is from a depth perspective. I like to go nice and deep. I go 4 inches down, and that's where I'm placing the clove of garlic. And then from there, I like to be amending it with worm castings. So I'm going to add some worm castings into each one of those holes to once again ensure that that garlic clove has everything that it needs to be growing big and strong. And then the last thing that we do to put our garlic babies to sleep for the winter is that we add 2 to 3 inches of compost. And the timing for this is really right now. There's not a specific one date of the year that you can plant garlic, but rather a window kind of all through the fall. I know a lot of people that are in kind of slightly more cool or slightly harsher climates that started planting over the course of the last 2 weeks. For myself and a lot of individuals in the Mind and Soil community, we're going to be planting on October 20th. And you might be wondering, why are we planting on October 20th? Well, there's an old folklore that it's kind of like on the October full moon, which this year falls on October 20th. The old folklore is that that is the absolute best moon and time to be planting your garlic on. So even those in our community that have already planted most of their garlic, they're going to save a few heads and a couple cloves to ultimately plant those right on the 20th of this year. And we're going to do that all together. So if you do want to partake in that, just upload like an Instagram story, tag us at Mind and Soil, use the hashtag Garlic Gang, and then we're going to see people all kind of across North America and potentially the world with Dennis over in North Wales planting their garlic on October 20th. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. So let's watch a quick little video on each one of these. And the first one is spacing. And so as you can see here, I'm using my hori-hori knife. I'm going into that bed that I just added the compost into, and 6 inches across. We go to the next one, 6 inches. Once again, just digging a hole down. And I'm doing that about 4 inches there at the same time. And then I'm going kind of like vertical wise. And once again, from that first one, I'm now going up 6 inches. And that second hole that I planted there, I'm going up 6 inches. And I'd continue to do that for the entirety of the space that I'm planting for garlic. And then what I mentioned a second ago is that we do this in an off-center manner. So there's another hole that you can kind of see right here that I did. So we did 6 inches across, and then we did 6 inches coming this way. And then right in the middle is our off-centered garlic clove. And we can fit one more in there so that in this kind of one little area here, I've actually got 5 cloves of garlic that are going in. And that's what I would do all throughout the bed. So that'd be your way to absolutely maximize the space. So now that we have dug our holes, the next thing that we need to do is add a little bit of worm castings into each one of those holes. And this is something that you can buy on the Mind and Soil website if you wanted to. But all that you need to be doing here is taking about a half handful and then popping that into each one of the holes. Worm castings are kind of nature's most natural and beautiful fertilizer. Really, really, really great way to get microbial life in and around where that garlic clove is going to be growing. All right, so we put our worm castings into each of the holes there, which means that that hole is now completely prepped for the garlic clove to be going in it. So if you've done all these steps so far, then you're like so well on your way and doing everything to set these babies up to grow beautifully. All that we need to do for planting them is at that 4-inch depth, just pop the individual clove into the ground. You're going to leave the paper on the clove, and you're going to put it in with the flat side down and the pointy side facing up. And then once you've placed it in there, you're just going to kind of backfill with some of the surrounding soil and then just kind of compress that down a little bit so that it's nice and snug in there. Okay, we've got one more thing that we're going to do in the kind of fall planting phase for garlic. But if you have any questions, please do start typing those into the chat function, because we're going to pause for a moment before we get into the spring growth phase. And if you don't have any questions, I'd also love just to hear how this is resonating with you. If this has been helpful, if you've been able to catch and pick up on everything here, please give me a little bit of feedback in the chat function there before we dive into the spring growth phase. Okay, so the last thing that we need to do while you type up any of those questions or any of that feedback is that we need to put that 2 to 3 inch leaf mulch over top of our babies. And so what we're going to be doing here is grabbing a whole bunch of leaves. They're coming down from the trees. It's free, it's wonderful. And we're going to use that as like a little bit of a blanket over our garlic babies. So I just dump all of them onto the bed there. And then I'm just kind of like spreading them with my hands evenly across the bed. And then that is going to create kind of a 2 to 3 inch layer of a little bit more insulation so that the really cold air and temperatures up above are still just a little bit further away from our garlic babies. But we've done that without adding 2 to 3 inches of like really heavy materials that they would then need to be pushing through and fighting through come springtime. So that's the kind of beauty of a mulch here. And one additional thing that you could be doing if you wanted, and I kind of recommend it, is that you could put, say, a tarp over top, or you could put landscape fabric over top, or you could even put cardboard over top of this so that the leaves aren't blowing away through the winter. And all that you would do is you just put a couple of rocks on each side, each end of it there, and then that would ensure that the landscape fabric or cardboard doesn't fly away and all the leaves stay underneath there. Okay, so if you've made it to this point, then you've done kind of the majority of the work. You're in an amazing position to be growing beautiful garlic. I'm going to pause for just a second here to dive into the chat function, see some of the questions that might have come through, and then we'll get into the back half of the garlic planting and growing season here. All right. So from Wilma, I was going to plant today because frost is coming quickly, but I don't have worm castings. I have excellent soil, compost, and mulch. Will it make a huge difference? So Wilma, if you're able to, I would encourage you to kind of take a little bit of a look around, see if you can find any garden centers nearby that might have some worm castings. If you aren't able to find them, we are able to ship them out to Calgary so that you'd have them by the end of next week there. So you could send me an email, jordan@mindandsoil.com, and we could get those out to you. But if you're not able to find them kind of in the next week or so, then I would get those garlic babies into the ground, because over in Calgary, it is going to be a little bit colder over there. Awesome, awesome question. Dennis, amazing. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to hear that you've already learned a whole lot. And Dennis's question here was, do you use all sizes of cloves? Amazing question. And this is something that I'm actually going to be experimenting with this coming year. So I'm going to do an experiment of a full row in a 4 foot by 8 foot raised bed of the smallest cloves that I can find. So basically, I'm going to go through all of my garlic and find the absolute smallest cloves, and I'm put them all in a line there. And then right next door, I'm going to put all of the biggest cloves that I can find, because there's a lot of thinking and thought process around use the biggest cloves that you can, because the best, or the genetics in there are going to ultimately provide even more large and big cloves. So I haven't done an experiment on it where I've really been specific to be able to test small cloves versus big cloves, but I would definitely veer on the side of using your biggest cloves and finding the biggest cloves possible. And then at the end of the season, after you harvest, you're going to notice that in there you've got some really big heads and then probably some medium-sized ones. Take those biggest heads, put them to the side, don't allow yourself to eat them, and use those biggest heads that have the biggest cloves the following season. And then also at that time, you'll be able to see the video from the results, and I'll be able to determine how much of an impact did using big cloves versus small cloves have. So Dennis, stay tuned on that front, and great question there. Okay, question from T Rich here. What about using soil conditioner, aged pine fines versus leaves as a mulch? So I haven't used aged pine fines. I really, really enjoy leaves myself. For any kind of thing that's like pines and needles, just be careful about the kind of the pH level on it, because I believe that they are a little bit more acidic than leaves. So if you're able to find leaves, amazing. If you're not, potentially go down that path. I would just do a little bit of research on it first to see what the acidity level is. And then another option would be using something like straw. Okay. Okay, so question here, kind of on the same topic from Colleen. Can I use grass clippings rather than leaves to cover the bed? So Colleen, from that side, grass clippings, they're going to be very high in nitrogen. So what I do is I take my grass clippings and I put those into my compost. And then in the springtime, which you're going to see in just a second, once they've fully composted, I then add those in as a new mulch. So it's almost as if like leaves are so abundant as we get into the fall that it's a good use of them. And grass clippings, it's almost like a more valuable free resource that I would encourage you to put into your compost before then putting into the garden bed as finished compost 3 to 4 months later. So if possible, use leaves. If not, then you could still use a little bit of grass clippings. I just don't think it'll kind of have quite the same effect as leaves there. Perfect. Tabia asked a question here. Is the same for elephant garlic and their corns? So I believe I haven't grown any elephant garlic myself. I've got 3 cloves over there for this year just to try it out with. But I would imagine there that once again, if you use the biggest cloves instead of using the smallest cloves, that would be the best decision to be making, to be getting nice and big, huge in that instance, elephant heads of garlic. Perfect. Amazing questions from everybody that is been asking them here. Thank you so much for all those. And what I want to be doing now is I want to dive into the kind of spring phase. So we've put our babies to sleep. The next phase is kind of the growth phase of the season. And then after that is when we then get into the harvesting period. So this last chunk isn't quite as long as the first part. And then at the end of the growth phase and the harvest phase, we'll once again open it up for any questions towards the end there and do a little bit of Q&A at the end. Okay, so we put our babies to sleep in the fall here underneath their leaf mulch, and we gave them everything that they need. They've got the compost, they've got the worm castings, they're in nice kind of fresh and loose soil. And we just want them to be hanging out beneath the surface through October, November, December. And then when we start getting into January, we start thinking about the growth phase. So depending on where it is that you're located, if it's down in North Carolina where it's going to be a little bit warmer, you could start seeing your garlic poking through the surface probably as early as like late January. For myself in Squamish here in Canada, we're right on the coast, but a little bit cooler. And I usually see mine in early February. And then if you're over, say, in Calgary, it could be even a little bit later, more like the beginning of March. So just kind of keep your eyes peeled on your garlic bed to see if they're poking through the surface. Now, if you're like me and a complete garlic helicopter parent, then what you're probably going to be doing is as you get to like February, going down and moving the leaf mulch around a little bit and seeing if I can find any of the initial shoots of garlic beginning to grow. And sure enough, in this instance, I was beginning to see them. I can't help myself from doing it. I have to do it. It's just, I get too excited for garlic. So the growth phase, it really starts kicking off as we get into kind of the beginning and mid-March here. And as we begin to get those longer and warmer days, our garlic babies, they really want to grow. And so we need to make sure that they have all of the nutrition that they need to now grow into big and beautiful heads of garlic. And so to do so, what I do is I first actually remove that leaf mulch. It served its purpose. It kept them warm through the winter. And what we can see here now is that all those garlic babies are anywhere from 2, 3, 4, 5 inches out of the surface. So they've made it through the soil and through the leaf mulch. Now, the leaf mulch is good, but it's primarily just carbon. And what our babies need now is their NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. So I first remove that and then I feed them with our 4-4-4 superfood. And this is just a really beautiful, natural, and organic feed using all kinds of different meals like feather meal, alfalfa meal, kelp meal, bone meal, blood meal, and then different rock dusts as well. And this ensures that the baby has all of the nutrients that it needs down there to really go into growth mode. And so all that I do for that is I don't want to disturb anything beneath the surface, but I want to top dress with 1 to 2 tablespoons at the base of each plant. So I just sprinkle it around as I did there. And then with my hand, I gently massage that into the top 1 inch or so of soil. And then once I've massaged it in like that, I would give it a really nice watering so that those nutrients make their way down into the root zone where the plant will then be able to put it to use. Okay, so we've got our superfood in there. And this is now where, again, remember at the very beginning, I mentioned that I add compost in the fall and I add compost in the spring. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go around each one of those plants and I'm going to put down a handful or 2 of compost to, again, give it kind of 1 to 2 inches. And I love to do this with a compost because it's lighter than like soil, but then it also is providing a lot more nutrients than the leaves that we had on top of it. And we've got all kinds of microbial life in there as well. When you go and take a look at my compost, it is absolutely kind of teeming and bustling with worms and little insects and little critters. And what they're doing when they make their way into their beds is they're breaking down all sorts of organic matter and freeing up more and more nutrients for our garlic babies and all of our plant babies to be putting to use. So as we get into the spring here, it's really shifting from being in a dormant mode into a growth mode. And we want to ensure that as those garlic babies try to make the most of all the sun that they're getting, all the warmth that they're getting, that they have the energy, the nutrients to ultimately be growing as big as possible. And so by doing that, the superfood plus the compost mulch, you're going to see really beautiful garlic in your beds. So they're really going to start to grow. They're going to start to take off. It's so much fun because, you know, they go from just being these teeny tiny things, just barely shooting out of the surface, to beginning to really put on a whole lot of growth. And this is one of the reasons why I love garlic so much, is that like, there's a couple things that we need to do in the fall to plant them. And we do that in the course of one day. And then we have our day where we switch them into growth mode in the spring. But other than that, they're a really, really low maintenance crop. There isn't any like trellising that needs to be doing. The weeding is very minimal. So it's really just like a couple of key moments throughout the season. And then they do their thing on their own. And so we know that we are getting to the end of the growth phase when we begin to see our garlic scapes. So the garlic scapes are going to be growing off the top of each one of the garlic plants. And now if we left those garlic scapes on the plants, ultimately, as we get into like really late in the summer, this is where the garlic would seed from, and you get new seeds coming out of this. However, that takes a lot of energy away from the the bulb development beneath the surface there. And so what we actually want to be doing is chopping off all of our garlic scapes. And it's really, really easy to be able to do this. All that we need to do is go to each one of the plants, and this is going to be in late June, even early July. And we just go through each one of the plants. We find the garlic scape coming out the top, and then it's going to twirl around in a little circle. And then we just chop it off. And then we have this kind of big handful of garlic scapes at the end. And a great part about this is that it's almost the first garlic harvest that we get, because the garlic scapes, they have this really beautiful flavor to them, where it's a really nice and mild kind of garlicky flavor. If anybody has any favorite ways of utilizing garlic scapes, please do share them in the chat function. For myself, I'll make a little bit of pesto out of them, but even more so, I'll chop them up into a stir fry, or I'll just throw them onto the grill with some olive oil and grill up the garlic scape, and then have that on the side of a meal as well. So garlic scapes, super, super yummy. Alrighty, so we've made it through the growth phase. We've cut off the garlic scapes there, and that means that we now need to start thinking about, when do we harvest our garlic babies? Perfect. And I'm just going to pause for a second because I can see a question or two coming through here. Amazing. So Rayanne, she loves her pesto. And then from Tabia, is a 411 the same or close enough as 511? Yeah, so that's going to be very, very similar there. For garlic, because it is the bulb beneath the surface that is developing, you want to have probably a little bit more phosphorus in there. So phosphorus, which say a bat guano or a bone meal, those are going to be very high in phosphorus. And that's ultimately what really helps drive that root development beneath the surface. But then it also is growing above the surface, which is why we like to have some nitrogen in there too. And so for us, we like to utilize something that is a 4-4-4. And so if you have a 411 or a 511 on hand, I would consider trying to get a little bit more phosphorus in there. And phosphorus is the second number of those three. Perfect. Dennis, chopped and sprinkled over bowls of ramen. Yum, that sounds good. And Wilma, yeah, Wilma's mentioned here that she still has some snow on her beds in March there. And so that, it does kind of lead into the harvest side as well, because depending on where we are, these are all going to be happening, within a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks of one another. It's going to vary a little bit for each and every one of us. There is not a defined, everyone in the whole wide world should be planting on October 20th, and then shifting into growth mode on March 7th, and then harvesting on July 8th. It's going to vary for all of us. And so what we need to be looking for is signs and indications from our plant babies. So let's go ahead and dive into harvesting here. And as I mentioned there's going to be signs from the garlic baby where it's saying, I am ready to be harvested. And it's wonderful because it's really, really simple. So all that we need to be looking for on our garlic babies is 3 to 4 leaves that have yellowed off and died off and are really just kind of falling down to the side of the plant, potentially even have fallen off of the plant. And so when we look at these exact same babies that were in that bed that I've been showing you all the videos of, this is just what it looks like in kind of mid to late July. And so as I can see here, there's the first little leaf that has died off. And then here's the second leaf that has died off. And then here's the third leaf that has died off. And then we've got the fourth leaf up here that's died off. So I know that this garlic baby is ready to be harvested. And this is probably the most exciting day of the year for me, because It's like when you've got like a present for your birthday or something like that. You don't know what's in there, but you're excited because it's, probably hopefully going to be really, really wonderful. There's this kind of like unknown excitement. And in this instance, we know that our garlic babies have been growing beneath the surface. The stalks, the stems on them, they look really, really beautiful. And so we now get to see, what have we been growing and how have they been doing beneath the surface. I'm going to show you the video of me harvesting that one really big head of garlic that I showed you at the very beginning of this presentation. I kind of had that feeling that I kind of knew it was going to be a nice one. And so I set my camera up so that I'd be able to film it. I'm going to share that with you. But one fun game that you could do if any of you have kids or other individuals that you're looking to get into gardening is when you're in kind of that growth phase in April, May, and you can start to see kind of how the plants are developing, is take a bunch of little name tags and let individuals guess which garlic baby they think is ultimately going to yield the biggest head of garlic. And then just take a little piece of string, tie that around the garlic stem, and then come harvest day, have a little bit of a competition or a little kind of reward winning for whoever properly selected the largest head of garlic there. So just kind of a fun way to get kids into it. We did that in my backyard here. Ended up being probably like 9 or 10 different tags that were spread throughout the garden there. Really fun way of going about it. All right, so I want to dive into the video here. Take a look at this. This is the garlic head that I showed you at the very beginning here. And Rayanne, just after this, I'm going to get to your question on watering there. Sorry, I missed that a little bit earlier on there. Here we go. And pop, there it is. So just look at the size of the root system on there. And that, just goes to show that the heads of garlic that we see, they have huge roots that are coming off of the bottom on them. And so for harvesting our garlic, once we find those 4 dried up leaves that have kind of died off, all that we need to be doing is taking a shovel, a hoary knife, and do it a good kind of 4 to 5 inches off of the main stem underneath and pop it out. You're going to probably need to yank and pull on the main stem pretty hard. As you saw with that one there, it took me a couple of pulls to be able to, ultimately get it out of the ground there. But again, if you follow each of the steps along the way, and it kind of begs the question, like, that root system there is so big and so lush because it was what we did back in October, right around now, that set it up for success. We planted it in soil that was going to allow it to really grow as nice and loose and porous. And we gave it worm castings and compost so it had some nutrition. And then we put it to sleep with that mulch. And then as we got into the springtime, we gave it a really nice feeding so that it had everything to grow big and strong. And just to put this one into perspective here, when I take a look at it in my hand, it ended up nearly being the size of my palm, was how large that head of garlic was. And the kind of like the stalk or the stem, as you can see, are like larger than my fingers coming off of it. So a really, really beautiful head of garlic. And I don't know, I probably had 15 or so that were very much in that same size there. And I've put them to the side, and I'm going to be replanting those ones, the cloves from them, over the course of the next week or two. So folks, that's everything that I wanted to cover off on for today. Thank you all so much for the questions, the engagement all throughout our session here. That's been so much fun. I'd love to open it up for any questions that anybody has. So please do start kind of chiming in and asking any questions that you do have in the chat function. More than happy to kind of hang online here for a little while to get as many of those answered. And I would love any feedback as well. If any of this has been helpful for you, I would love to hear that. If there's a particular tip or learning that you took from it, please do share that with me as well. Would absolutely love to hear what stood out to you most. Okay, so a quick question from Tabia. Can garlic be grown in raised beds? Yes, so those garlic that I showed you, those are all in raised beds. Now you can also do garlic in a container. So you'd probably want to go with at least a 5-gallon size container or grow bag. And if you are doing one in like a grow bag or something that's circular, then you're going to want to plant your very first clove right in the middle. And then in essentially like a spiral, you're going to move outwards until you get towards the outside. And you're going to do that about every 4 inches. You're going to place a new clove. So play around with that, experiment around with it, see how it goes. If you are doing it in a grow bag, and then if you're doing it in a raised bed or in the ground, again, every 6 inches off centered. So there's one in the middle there, and you'll be all good there. Colleen, thank you so much. I appreciate the kind words there. All right. And so, yeah, Ray Ann asked a question, as did Tabia, around watering. And this is a really, really great question here because, similar to temperatures and when we're going to be harvesting, watering is going to vary for each and every one of us. And I like to think about watering in the same 3 phases because we're going to do it a little bit differently in each of those 3 phases. So the planting phase, the growth phase, the harvest phase. In the planting phase right now in October, I do not water at all. Now, with that being said, I live right on the coast. We get tons of rain here. But even if you get, rain once per week, I would say that that is more than sufficient. If you're living somewhere where like it very rarely rains, then you might want to give it a little bit of watering, again, like once per week. But it does not need very much because we aren't looking for it to put on any growth above the surface in the fall. So for myself, no watering in the planting phase. As we get into the growth phase, this is probably the most variable out of the 3 because we do want them to be getting nice and a good amount of water. We don't want garlic to be sitting in like a wet, soggy bed. So make sure that after you have watered your garlic, that it's not sitting in wet soil, but rather is drying up nicely and then giving it its next watering. If you're using a container, it's going to be less often than if you're using a raised bed, because with a raised bed, that water, it's going to kind of move throughout all of the bed. It's got more room to spread throughout and then ultimately drain out of the bed into the ground beneath. Versus in a container, the water actually ends up being a little bit trapped in there. So for myself, last year, I would turn my irrigation system on for about 30 minutes every other day. And so turn on for 30 minutes, give it a nice big watering. And then over the course of the next 48 hours, it dried up nicely. We didn't really get very much rain at all, so I didn't deviate from that too much. But if there ever were days where, I turned it on for 30 minutes, and then the next day it rained, I wouldn't turn it on the following day. I would have it skip through that cycle. So you're going to need to vary it a little bit. The 2 indicators that you could be looking at if you're, kind of worrying about it at all, is that if you've given it compost and worm castings and a feed like Superfood, then the leaves should not be looking yellow or tired at all until like late June. And so if you're noticing in April and early May that the plant is looking yellow or fatigued, then that's probably a sign that it's not getting enough water. And you could double check that by going down to the soil, digging down about 1 to 2 inches. And if it's still fairly dry down there, then give it a really nice and deep watering. Okay, so that's the growth phase. And the last piece for watering is in the harvest phase. So remember, we cut our garlic scapes off. That's sending all of the energy down to root development. And that's usually about like 3 weeks or so before we'll notice that 3 to 4 of the leaves have died off. So we have this kind of like 3-week window or so. So after I've cut the garlic scapes off, I'll probably water it for the next 7 days. But in the 10 to 14 days leading into when I am going to be harvesting those garlic babies, I am not going to water at all. I really want to stress the plant so that it focuses every last bit of energy of going back into the head and developing it and developing the cloves so that it's passing along its genetics. So if you see that you've got kind of like 2 leaves that have died off, then I would shut off the water. And then the 3rd leaf, the 4th leaf, they're going to die off over the course of the next, again, 7, 10, 14 days in there. So the big takeaway for the third piece is to shut off the watering about 10 to 14 days before harvesting. I hope that sheds a little bit of light on the watering front. I leave it out and generally end up talking about it like this towards the end, just because it is a little bit more complex and it's a lot of information to be taking in over the course of the session. So yeah, wanted to save that towards the end here. Perfect. Tabia, if you wouldn't mind just clarifying for me what you mean by an elevated bed and kind of how that would differ from a raised bed, that would be great. I just want to fully understand what you're looking for there. Either way, like again, you could be planting in something as small as a 1 gallon container. So I'm not 100% sure what the difference is with an elevated bed, but I would kind of lean on the side of, yes, you 100% can be growing in it as long as there's, again, at least like a gallon's worth of soil to be planting into. T-Rich, thank you so much for the kind words there. I'm so happy to hear that you've enjoyed the presentation. Love it. And Wilma, amazing, super helpful. We have not yet grown garlic, so this was great. Amazing. Well, Wilma, I definitely cannot wait to see how it all goes for you. Wilma, any questions that you do have, you can send them through to me by email here, jordan@mindandsoil.com. And then if there are like specific topics that any of you are interested in having a happy hour on or around, go ahead and type those into the chat function just before we kind of begin wrapping up and closing off our session here for today. But we do these probably about once per month. The next one that we're going to do is on overwintering our pepper plants. Which I'll grab one real quick here. Okay, so you can see here, I've got one of my habanero pepper plants that I've just brought inside. And in a couple of weeks' time, it's going to be looking like this, nice and full of life. And I'm just going to let it vegetate over the course of the winter here. So there's going to be a nice, big, beautiful plant when I put it back into the beds there. So yeah, any topics that you're interested in us doing a happy hour on, please let us know in the chat function there. And also, if you want to see any of those videos, just subscribe to the channel. New videos come out every single week there. I'm just going to take a quick little peek here to see if there's any more questions. Okay, the ones that are on legs about 2 to 3 feet off the ground. Yeah, Tabia, that would work totally 100% well. In an instance like that, again, I would follow the 6-inch off-center spacing, 4 inches deep. You're going to want to make sure that in that elevated bed that you still have like a good kind of 8 to 10 inches of soil. The more soil that you have, the better. Okay, Rayanne, thank you so much. You're the best. And Rayanne, congrats on the amazing season that you had here. That was so fun dropping off some worm castings for you in the spring and then seeing it just be such an amazing season for you. So huge, huge, huge congrats to you on that. Well, I think that gets all of the questions answered here. So folks, thank you all so much for your time here. You will kind of be notified when the next happy hour is coming up. I hope to see each of you on that next one and can't wait to be growing with you all through the fall with garlic and into the spring next season. Alrighty, folks, have a great day. Talk to you all later.